All right, so 2 Samuel chapter 12 is started at verse 26. Is where we want to pick up. So 2 Samuel chapter 12, make sure you're there in your Bibles. Looks like you guys are there. So this is lesson 19, Amnon's sin. Some of you had wondered yesterday, is that a spelling mistake? Ammon. No, there's a person named Amnon that we'll see here. So, but you can know this. At the end of our last lesson, David lost his son. He mourned for the son that had been born to he and Bathsheba had died. But God restored joy because God gave David and Bathsheba another son. And that son's name is Solomon. Okay, Solomon. We want to make sure that we point that out. God did comfort Bathsheba and David with the birth of another son, Solomon. Okay? But we're going to pick this up at verse 26 there. So we're going to go and join Joab and what was going on with Joab. It says, "And Joab fought against Rabbah of the children of Ammon and took the royal city. And Joab sent messengers to David and said, I have fought against Rabbah and taken the city of waters. Now therefore gather the rest of the people together and encamp against the city and take it, lest I take the city and it be called my name. And David gathered all the people together and went to Rabbah and fought against it and took it. And he took their king's crown from off his head. The weight thereof was a talent of gold, with the precious stones, and it was set on David's head. And he brought forth the spoil of the city in great abundance, and he brought forth the people that were therein, and put them under saws and under harrows of iron, and brought axes of iron, and made them pass through the brick kiln. Thus did he unto all the cities of the children of Ammon. So David and all the people returned to Jerusalem." Before we remember or look at this battle, we have to remember that Joab has already won a couple of victories here before. Okay? They were the ones where he fought the Syrians and the Ammonites, and then the Syrians fled. They were afraid. That was the battle in which Uriah was killed, Uriah the Hittite. So, Joab and his company set out once more to once again come to the city to defeat it and to take it. And they have success. They're able to take the lower part of the city, Joab reports. But the upper part of the city is a little bit harder to take. It's probably higher. It's well defensed. And so Joab sends a messenger back to David and says to David, "Bring to me the rest of the army. Let's be able to do battle with the rest of the army." Another reason that Joab gave there was, David, if I take the city, the men might want to honor me and give me the name of the city. Remember how the people would say, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his 10,000s. Well, the same thing would be happening here. So the honor needs to stay with you, David. So he calls for David to come. David comes. He's able to help defeat the people there in the city, able to wipe them out. And this time, David is going to ensure that these people do not cause more trouble again. What does he do? Well, it's a bit of a sad thing. We look at it's not a nice way to go into battle and have to deal with the enemy when you capture them. In today's day and age, if we were to capture the enemy, we wouldn't do this. But there's a special situation. David lined the people up, and he ordered the people to be killed in cruel ways with saws and axes and to be passed through a brick kiln. Okay? Why would David do this? Why would he use these cruel ways? Well, first of all, and most important, these people were the enemies of God. These were wicked men and women who were enemies of God. Another reason, a second reason, was that these men and their king had threatened to put out the eyes, to do some of the same types of things to the people of Judah. And if we look in another place in the Bible, the book of Amos, it tells us that these people here in Ammon also cruelly cut up women who were going to have babies. They killed them, murdered them. So when one behaves and acts, and I think that's an important theme that you can get here throughout this lesson. When a person behaves or acts in such a way living in a sin, one of those people cannot be shocked if that same sin or something like that comes back to haunt them later, comes back to cause trouble in their life later. These people here in Amnon had dismembered people, cruel and unusual punishments. And now they want mercy. No, the Lord is okay with David doing this. We don't read of the Lord chastising or punishing David for this. So it was good and right. Next, we see this gentleman named Amnon. We're going to come to him. Verse 1 of chapter 13. Please follow along there. And it came to pass after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her. It's complicated. We got to stop right there. So you've got David, and he had many wives, so many we couldn't even keep track of them. One of them being Bathsheba. And with them, she had a son named Solomon. Okay, she had a son named Solomon. Well, David's had more wives. Ahinoam, and with her she had Amnon. So Solomon and Amnon would be half brothers, the same father but different mothers. Okay. Over here we've got another woman, Maacah, and she has 2 children. Absalom, a son, and a daughter, Tamar. So they would be full brother and sister. They had the same father and the same mother. But Amnon would have had the same father but a different mother than Absalom and Tamar. So they are half brothers and sisters. Okay? So first we have to understand that, how they're related. And we know that this is going to cause some trouble. There's some things that we can say here. First of all, God had promised to David, your house will be at war with itself. Your house will have trouble. That was a punishment that David had for his sin. As we said before, for when one lives in sin, one cannot be surprised when the Lord visits them with trouble. Now, some other things that we want to point out is you couldn't have all these people living under the same roof in the same house. There would be jealousy. There would be trouble. There would be hatred. Think about our own families, our own homes. We aren't perfect, and even there in our own homes with full brothers and sisters and parents, and we are called to love each other. We do love each other, yet so easily we fall into temptation to fight against each other. Well, what if you have some people who aren't even hardly related to each other, or there's so many of them? There will be tons of jealousy. So we can assume that David probably had different homes or apartments in his home, or different places where these wives of his would live. And these children would also probably have their own apartments, maybe connected to the homes, or their own rooms within the homes. Okay? So there's the potential for trouble here. David can't give the attention that he needs to each of them. So we're going to see how some of that trouble comes true. Verse 2, and Amnon was so vexed that he fell sick for his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and Amnon thought it hard for him to do anything to her. So now we want to stop there a second and discuss that. Amnon sees his half-sister Tamar and finds her to be beautiful. They hardly probably had anything to do with her. So for him, he viewed her as a distant relative, or even not even a relative, but he views her not with the love that a brother and sister should have for one another, but he views her and is attracted to her with the love that a husband and wife would have towards one another. Why would these things happen? Well, we've got a couple other problems too. Let's go back to David. David is absent. A father who's absent from the home is not healthy. A father who is hardly ever at home is not healthy. David was always gone off fighting wars. He wasn't there to instruct his boys how to live and how to behave. He wasn't there to correct them as they should. They probably got away with many things. But he was so busy. He wasn't there to set a good example for his sons. So many of them walked in sin. They just did what was around them. Their mothers, who had come out of, probably some of them, some heathen lands, had idols and other worship that they had to see. But the fact of the matter is we have a strange family here. So Tamar is beautiful. Okay? And Amnon wanted to marry her. He saw her as beautiful. He was sick. He became so sick. He so desired her, he couldn't even eat or he couldn't even drink anymore. He was so vexed with her. He was so focused on having Tamar as his wife. Now this is sin, to be so focused on one thing, to sit there and brood and not eat and drink, and to become ill because we want something on this earth so badly. It's one thing if we want the house of the Lord or His Word, but even then God teaches us we need to eat and drink. So, not only should he not have desired his half-sister, but it's against God's law. Brothers and sisters may not marry. Now, God obviously had to make exemptions when we look back at Adam and Eve. And brothers and sisters were marrying there, and obviously cousins. But in this situation, no longer is that necessary. Brothers ought not to marry sisters. God forbids it. The penalty for that sin was death. But Amnon didn't care. He continued to wish. So verse 3 comes up with how he solves his problem, or someone helps him solve his problem. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeiah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very subtle man. And he said unto him, Why art thou, being the king's son, lean from day to day? Wilt thou not tell me? And Amnon said unto him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. And Jonadab said unto him, Lay thee down on thy bed, and make thyself sick. And when thy father cometh to see thee, say unto him, I pray thee, Let my sister Tamar come, and give me meat, and dress the meat in my sight, that I may see it, and eat it at her hand. So this Jonadab, who's a cunning and evil man, so he would be a relative. So David would have a brother who would have had a son named Jonadab. So this would be a cousin. And Jonadab is a sly, subtle, cunning, probably foolish and wicked man. And he comes in and he says to Amnon, Why are you so sick looking? Man, you're losing weight by the pound, by the day. And he spills the beans. Well, I love my brother Absalom's sister Tamar, and I desire her. Jonadab, seeing nothing wrong, or maybe even thinking, I can't wait to meddle here and get into the middle of something. He says, well, why don't you do this? Here's a plan. When the king comes in to see you, because you're obviously looking ill and this isn't going very good, lay on your bed and tell him how ill and how sick you are, and say to your father, Father, there's one thing that would probably make me feel better. Have my sister Tamar come in and make me some food. She makes good food. Have her come in and make me some food. And there you'll have her in the room all alone. And so that's the plan of Jonadab. So Amnon does it. He lies down on his bed. He pretends to be sicker than he really was. His father comes in. He says, well, I want you to have Tamar come in. So Tamar comes in and she asks him, well, let's see what happens there. Okay. Verse 6, So Amnon lay down and made himself sick, and when the king was come in to see him, Amnon said unto the king, I pray thee, let Tamar my sister come, and make me a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat at her hand. Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, Go now to thy brother Amnon's house, and dress him meat. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was laid down, and she took flour, and kneaded it, and made cakes in his sight, and did bake the cakes. And she took a pan, and poured them out before him, and he refused to eat. And Amnon said, Have out all the men from me. And they went out, every man from him. And Amnon said unto Tamar, Bring the meat into the chamber, that I may eat of thine hand. And Tamar took the cakes which she had made, and brought them in to the chamber to Amnon her brother. So, the plan works. She's now coming in to make Amnon some food. But now Amnon, not wanting any witnesses to be in the room, orders all the other people out. He's a prince. They have to obey him. So all the servants and everyone leaves the room, leaving only Tamar and Amnon in the room alone. She begins to prepare. She has whatever instruments she needs. She bakes him some small cakes, prepares the food for him, and approaches her. And that's where we pick it up here. Verse 11. And when she had brought them unto him to eat, he took hold of her. So he grabs her and said unto her, Come lie with me, my sister. And she answered, Nay, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing ought to be done in Israel. Do not thou this folly. And whither shall I cause my shame to go? And as for me, thou shalt be as one of the fools of Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee. Howbeit he would not hearken unto her voice, but being stronger than he forced her, and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred wherewith he hated her was greater than the love with her wherewith he had loved her. And Amnon said unto her, Arise, and be gone. So, when she comes to the bedside, he grabs her, he pulls her in with him, and she lies with him. And he behaves to her as a husband and wife should, in a wicked, sinful way, for they're not married here. Okay? This is a sin against God's law. Tamar is shocked. She begged. She said, No, I don't want this. This is not the way it should be, but he didn't care. And then in the end, after he had humbled her, Amnon wouldn't listen to her. And now that hatred that he has for her is greater than the love he had for her. A minute ago, he loved her. Now, he hates her. How often isn't that the case in our lives? We want and we think we desire something so badly, and then once we have it, we realize it was really foolish. It was no good at all. It was a waste. And that's what happens here. So Amnon sends her away. She, now being ashamed of the sin that's been committed against her, she behaves a certain way too. So let's see how she behaves. Okay? Verse 16, And she said unto him, There is no cause. This evil in sending me away is greater than the other that thou didst unto me. But he would not hearken to her. Then he called his servant that ministered unto him, and said, Put now this woman out from me, and bolt the door after her. And she had a garment of diverse colors upon her, for with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins apparelled. Then his servants brought her out, and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head, and rent her garment of diverse colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head, and went crying. I'll stop there. So, the clothing that she was attired with was clothing that showed that she was a virgin, that she had not been married. She had not been with another man. Now she has to rip that clothing off. She has to put ashes on her head. And she walks through the city, parades herself so that men and women see something has happened to this daughter of the king. Why is she mourning like this? And she goes to her home and probably cries. And Absalom, her brother, comes to her, verse 20. And Absalom, her brother, said unto her, Hath Amnon thy brother been with thee? But hold now thy peace, my sister. He is thy brother. Regard not this thing. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. But when King David heard of these things, he was very wroth. And Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon, neither good or bad, for Absalom hated Amnon, because he had forced his sister Tamar. So Absalom becomes upset. He takes his sister, he loves her, he cares for her. He takes his sister into his own house where she can live alone after being ashamed of this. She's filled with that shame, and she remains there desolate in his house. And meanwhile, every day that Absalom sees her, his anger fills up in his heart towards his half-brother Amnon. He becomes angry and upset. Sadly, we also see that word finally reaches to David of what had happened, because probably many people had seen Tamar walking in the streets and asked him, King David, why does your daughter Tamar, why does she go about so mourning and ripping off her clothes of virginity? Why has she done that? And they say, well, it's very obvious here. Amnon has lined with her and committed this great sin. Well, what does David do? He needs to go march right down to the house of Amnon, drag him out of that house, chastise him, and then put him to death for this sin. That's what David should have done, but David doesn't. Think about that. Why couldn't David do it? He had done the exact same thing with Bathsheba. In fact, even more so, he had caused Uriah to be put to death. David feels so much guilt in his heart that he can't do this. That's why we also need to be careful about that. So Absalom's hatred in his heart grows for his brother. Grows and grows and grows more and more. And we'll see how that hatred finally grows and blossoms into something here in our future lessons. But David is also filled, but not with hatred, but David is filled with shame for his own sins, because of course, he could have taught his sons to walk in a godly way by being around more, but instead they walk in his wicked ways by doing these sins, the sins of adultery. And I'm sure David is greatly ashamed of it. So, why does God tell us about this in His Word? Sometimes we wonder, why does God tell us these kind of stories in the Bible, in the Scriptures? Well, God does that to teach us. Okay? We want to see how we need to keep ourselves from sin. But also we know how great, because we then know how great our sins and miseries are, we can also see the blessedness of God's grace that He gives for us. and that He saves us, sinners, saved by grace. We too are like David. We too are like Amnon. We don't deserve this. We're wicked and horrible. When we go to God and confess our sins and ask for that forgiveness, God greatly blesses us.